For millennia, the majestic pyramids of Egypt have stood tall over the desert sands. Everything about the remarkable ancient civilization that once graced these lands remained an enigma until the 19th of July, 1799. A French soldier, during Napoleon Bonaparte's Egyptian campaign, stumbled upon a substantial stone roughly 35 miles to the east of Alexandria, leading to the discovery of a written language that had been dormant for countless centuries. The subsequent translations of this stone would become the crucial key to unlocking the mysteries of an entire civilization. Egypt is the Nile's gift, is the renowned saying attributed to Herodotus, the father of history. Indeed, the Nile served as the very essence of life, providing Egypt with essential water for crop cultivation, which in turn fostered the growth of civilization along the entire Nile Valley. The riverine strip that naturally divided the Egyptian territory into two distinct regions created a conducive setting for civilization to flourish. As the Nile Valley took its present form during the Miocene epoch, the diverse geographical resources effectively played a role in the state's establishment. The yearly floods, spreading fertile soil to both the east and west, were instrumental. Over numerous centuries, layers of mud accumulated, and as the waters receded and flowed within their banks, the agricultural cycle commenced, positioning Egypt as one of the earliest farming societies in human history. By the close of the Paleolithic period, the production of arrows, harpoons, grains, sewn hides, bone tools, and pottery was widespread. Conversely, researchers utilized carbon-14 dating to confirm that grain harvesting occurred in a Neolithic granary on the edge of the Fayum region between 600 and 590 years ago, 4,600 and 4,250 BC. Subsequently, people constructed rudimentary dwellings and huts from reeds and hardened mud and cultivated grain in the marshy soils of the Nile. Ancient Egypt was geographically divided into two areas, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt was situated in the north, where the Nile branched out, forming the Nile Delta. Upper Egypt, extending southward to Aswan, lay to the south. Around 3000 BC, King Narmer unified these two kingdoms, although each retained its symbolic emblems, the hedjet, or white crown, for Upper Egypt, and the deshret, or red crown, for Lower Egypt. Consequently, the pharaohs became known as rulers of the two lands, symbolized by the shent, a double crown with each half signifying sovereignty over a distinct land. The pre-dynastic period in ancient Egypt represents the era preceding recorded history, spanning approximately from 6000 to 3150 BCE, progressing from the Paleolithic to the Neolithic age, and leading to the establishment of the First Dynasty. While written records are absent from this time, archaeological excavations in Egypt have unearthed artifacts that narrate the cultural history of the Nile River Valley. The pre-dynastic period is categorized by the regions or ancient settlements where these artifacts have been discovered, rather than by the specific cultures inhabiting them. The Halfa culture flourished around 30,000 BCE in the area between Egypt and Nubia, giving rise to the Kaddan and Sibyllian cultures around 10,000 BCE and the Harifian culture. All these cultures were primarily hunter-gatherer societies that gradually transitioned towards a more settled lifestyle, establishing permanent settlements based on agricultural practices. The Fayum Oasis, a natural depression located southeast of the Giza Plateau, provided a home for the Fayumian civilization from 9000 to 6000 BCE. These people resided near a vast lake and sustained themselves through farming, hunting, and fishing. The Fayumian people constructed homes from reeds, featuring subterranean basements for food storage. Domestication of cattle, sheep, and goats occurred, and basketry and pottery production thrived during this period. Tribal chieftains rose to positions of authority, which may have been hereditary within families or tribal units. Communities evolved from small nomadic tribes to larger, more diverse groups residing in the same area permanently. The Fayumian culture gave rise to the Merimd culture, flourishing from 5000 to 4000 BCE, named after artifacts found at the site of Merimdi on the western edge of the Nile Delta. The majority of Egyptians were agriculturalists, and farming formed the foundation of the dynastic Egyptian economy. Farmers relied on the annual summer floods to cultivate their crops. It's understood that the initial Egyptian farmers were hunter-gatherers. They cultivated crops such as wheat, lentils, barley, flax, and peas, in addition to raising livestock, as evidenced by findings at a site on the western side of the Nile Delta, the oldest levels of Merimde Beni Salama, which developed between 8000 and 4000 BC, alongside the Fayumian culture, both originating in the Neolithic era. The Nile Valley's convex landscape encouraged the formation of numerous basins, which in ancient times were annually flooded, bringing silt and mud that enriched the soil. These basins, of which 130 have been identified, served as reservoirs within the irrigation system of ancient Egypt. Granaries in ancient Egypt were crafted from clay jars or baskets, buried up to their necks in the ground. The Elomari culture, around 4000 BCE, built upon these advancements, constructing circular dwellings of greater complexity with plastered mud walls. All these cultures developed and prospered in Lower Egypt, the northern region of Egypt closest to the Mediterranean Sea, while civilization in Upper Egypt emerged later. The inhabitants of the Badarian culture lived in portable tents, similar to their ancient predecessors, but showed a preference for permanent dwellings. Following the Badarian period came the Amratian period, also known as Nakada the Firm, characterized by more sophisticated houses with windows and hearths, wattle and daub walls, and windbreaks around the main entrances. The practice of mummification began around 3500 BCE, with burial goods still being interred with the deceased. These developments were further propelled by the Gurzian culture, also known as Nakada II, from 3500 to 3200 BCE, which initiated trade with other regions, inspiring cultural and artistic changes. Houses were constructed from sun-baked brick, with more elaborate residences including courtyards, a feature that would become commonplace in later Egyptian homes. The city of Abydos, situated north of Nakada, evolved into a significant burial location, with large tombs being constructed, forming a necropolis, a city of the dead. Initially, these tombs were made of mud bricks, but later transitioned to massive, precisely cut limestone. Eventually, this site would become the burial ground for Egypt's rulers. Despite this, evidence suggests that individuals from across the nation had their deceased buried at Abydos, offering burial gifts to honor their memory. By this time, the cities of Zawiyet El Arian and Hierakonpolis were considered ancient, while Thinis, Nakada, and Nekhen were rapidly developing. The hieroglyphic script, invented around 3400 to 3200 BCE, was used for record-keeping, although complete sentences from this period are yet to be discovered. The earliest Egyptian writing discovered thus far originates from Abydos and was found on pottery, clay seal impressions, and bone and ivory artifacts. Complete sentences in Egypt do not appear until the reign of King Peribsen in the Second Dynasty, 500 years later. This period transitioned into the Nakada III period, from 3200 to 3150 BCE. Following Nakada III, the early dynastic period and Egypt's recorded history commenced. Commerce, communities, and populations in both Lower and Upper Egypt expanded and thrived. Small villages of brick homes and structures evolved into larger urban centers, which soon engaged in conflict, most likely over trade commodities and water resources. Thinis, Nakada, and Nekhen were the three primary city-states of Upper Egypt during this era. Thinis seems to have defeated Nakada before incorporating Nekhen. These conflicts were fought between the Scorpion kings, whose identities remain uncertain, and others, possibly Ka and Narmer. According to certain researchers, Scorpion I, Scorpion II, and Ka were the final three rulers of the proto-dynastic period before King Narmer invaded and unified Lower and Upper Egypt, establishing the First Dynasty. The early dynastic period in Egypt began in the years 3150 to 2613 BCE. This marks the start of the country's historical epoch, during which Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north were consolidated into a unified nation under centralized authority. During this period, the divine rule of the monarch originated, and a distinctive Egyptian culture emerged, encompassing the development of writing, arts, and sciences. Menes, the first king of Egypt, was a ruler of Upper Egypt, presumably from Thinis or Hierakonpolis, who subdued the surrounding city-states before conquering Lower Egypt around 3150 BCE. Narmer married Princess Nithotep of Nakata in a strategic alliance to strengthen ties between the two cities. He undertook military campaigns in Lower Egypt to suppress rebellions and extend his territory into Canaan and Nubia. He sponsored significant construction projects, and urbanization flourished throughout his reign. Horaha, Narmer's son, is believed to have succeeded him in 3100 BCE, continuing his father's military expansion and promoting trade. He displayed a notable interest in religion and the concept of the afterlife, and it was during his reign that the mastaba tomb was developed. Horaha was succeeded by his son Jer in 3050 BCE, who followed in his father's path. His son Jet, around 3000 BCE, married Princess Mernith and is considered to have assumed leadership of the nation after Jet's death. It remains unclear whether she ruled as a regent for her infant son Den or as queen, but her reign is noteworthy as the first recorded instance of a woman ruling in ancient Egypt. Den, around 2990 BCE, is regarded as the most prominent monarch of the first dynasty, reigning for 50 years. His reputation as an efficient monarch stemmed from his economic advancements, military victories, and the stability of his rule, evidenced by substantial construction endeavors and elaborate works of art. Den is the first monarch depicted wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt, signifying his rule over a unified nation. Den was succeeded by two more monarchs, Anedjib and later Semerkhet, both of whom faced challenging reigns marked by unrest. The dynasty concluded with Kwa's reign, during which his successors struggled for the throne and were ultimately defeated by Hotep-Sekemwi, who established the Second Dynasty. Internal conflict and a lack of, or misunderstanding of, records marred the Second Dynasty from 2890 to 2670 BCE. Reliable dates for the Second Dynasty monarchs are absent, and several kings' names appear to be repetitions of earlier rulers. Hotep-Sekemwi, meaning the two powerful ones are at peace, is a prime example of this issue. His name suggests he ascended to power after subduing the princes who vied for the throne after Kwa'a, but his name is inscribed at the entrance to Kwa'a's tomb, implying he was the ruler responsible for Kwa'a's burial and already possessed that name before the succession conflict erupted. Hotep-Sekemwi is credited with restoring peace to Egypt upon his ascension, although his reign, albeit brief, was marked by instability and rebellion. Raneb, also known as Nebra, was the first to link his name to that of the gods, thus establishing a connection between the monarch and the divine. There is no clear explanation for Peribsen's decision. Early scholars proposed he was the first monotheist, declaring Set to be the sole deity, but evidence from his reign demonstrating devotion to various gods refuted this. As his name is only found in Upper Egypt, it's plausible he chose to align with Set for political reasons, to differentiate himself from the Horus-centric religion of Lower Egypt. Regardless of the reason, he is considered a capable monarch, as commerce, the economy, religious practices, and the arts all flourished during his reign. Peribsen was succeeded by Khâsekemwy, likely his son, who continued his predecessor's construction projects and is believed to have brought Egypt's two regions back under central control, or at least reinforced unification. His most renowned works include statues at Hierakonpolis and Abydos, as well as his role as the father of Pharaoh Djoser. The Egyptian Third Dynasty commences with King Djoser, best known for his step pyramid at Saqqara. Manetho's timeline is ambiguous regarding whose Senenej was when he reigned in the Third Dynasty, and given his name, Sanakht's name is only known from the Abydos king list, the Turin Papyrus, and two reliefs discovered in the mastaba tomb number K2 at Beit Khalaf. Djoser erected so many monuments that historians have long assumed his rule spanned at least 20 years. He initiated military campaigns into Sinai and maintained Egyptian unity, resulting in the stability necessary for his construction projects and the flourishing of the arts. Djoser's Step Pyramid at Saqqara is Egypt's first recognized pyramid, designed by his architect and vizier Imhotep. Imhotep was a vizier, sage, architect, astrologer, and chief minister under Djoser, the second pharaoh of Egypt's third dynasty, who was later deified and worshipped as the god of medicine in Egypt and Greece, where he was associated with the Greek deity of medicine, Asclepius. He is credited with designing the Step Pyramid in Memphis's Saqqara necropolis. This pyramid, featuring 6 steps, is the world's oldest surviving monumental stone structure. An inscription bearing his name on a statue of Djoser, unearthed near the Saqqara pyramid site, attests to Imhotep's elevated status in Djoser's court. The inscription includes titles such as Leader of the Sculptors and Chief of the Seers. Historical records depicting Egyptian society and medicine throughout the Old Kingdom indicate that the chief magician of the pharaoh's court frequently served as the nation's chief physician. The Step Pyramid originated as a basic mastaba monument with a flat top and sloping sides, similar to numerous tombs from previous dynasties. However, the architect Imhotep envisioned grander plans for his king's eternal resting place. The Step Pyramid is essentially a series of mastabas stacked upon one another, each step slightly smaller than the one below to create a pyramidical shape. Earlier mastabas were constructed from mud bricks, but the Step Pyramid was built from stone slabs adorned with carved motifs of trees and reeds. Upon completion, the Step Pyramid stood 62 meters tall, making it the tallest structure of its time. To deter robbers and safeguard the king's remains and burial goods, the actual burial chambers of the tomb were excavated beneath the foundation, forming a labyrinth of passageways with chambers branching off the hallways. However, this strategy proved ineffective, as the tomb was plundered of all its valuables, including the king's body. In antiquity, only his foot was discovered within the tomb. Nonetheless, the Step Pyramid's design and construction exemplify the ingenuity and foresight of the Third Dynasty builders, who would later erect the Bent Pyramid and the Layer Pyramid, among numerous other structures and sanctuaries. These early visionaries laid the groundwork for the later true pyramids of the Fourth Dynasty, which have captivated and mesmerized people for millennia. The Old Kingdom of Egypt is also known as the Age of the Pyramids, or the Age of the Pyramid Builders, due to the prominent Fourth Dynasty, during which King Sneferu perfected the art of pyramid construction, and the pyramids of Giza were erected under the reigns of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Historical records from this era, spanning the 4th to 6th dynasties of Egypt, are scarce, and historians often regard the history of this period as literally written in stone, primarily architectural. Academics have reconstructed a history through statues and their inscriptions. The pyramids themselves provide limited information about their architects, but adjacent funerary shrines and stelae furnish the king's names and other crucial details. Furthermore, stone carvings discovered elsewhere from this period document various events and their dates. Finally, the mausoleum of Unas, the last monarch of the 5th dynasty, contained the first pyramid texts, detailed drawings and writings inside the tomb, which shed light on the religious beliefs of the period. During the Old Kingdom of Egypt, the elite standardized art and figures were produced uniformly to reflect the tastes of Memphis, the capital. Although other art forms, such as painting and literature, exhibit greater artistry in the Old Kingdom, statues from the late early dynastic and early Old Kingdom periods are remarkably similar. The Old Kingdom's most iconic artworks are the Pyramids of Giza and the Great Sphinx of Giza, both of which endure to this day. Smaller structures were also crafted with comparable precision and beauty. In essence, Egyptians placed immense value on Old Kingdom art and architecture in later periods. Although all levels of society may have shared similar religious beliefs, social inequality persisted even in death. The primary obstacle to achieving an afterlife was being buried outside of Egypt. Egyptians believed that rebirth necessitated burial within Egypt. If death occurred abroad, relatives undertook extraordinary efforts to return their bodies for burial, ensuring proper funerary rituals could be performed and burial in their homeland, thus facilitating entry into the afterlife. To manage the workforce that constructed the pyramids at Giza and elsewhere during this time, unprecedented bureaucratic efficiency was essential. This bureaucracy could only function under a powerful central authority, at the apex of the pyramid that represented Egyptian society. The monarch stood at this apex. He was theoretically granted ownership of all of Egypt by the gods. Egyptian social structure was divided into literate and illiterate classes. The literate class, a small segment of the population, constituted the ruling class and were central to defining ancient Egyptian society and our understanding of this civilization. Individuals often held greater importance than their positions. Consequently, while the king established the framework of bureaucratic power, effective administration ultimately relied on the same pool of literate aristocrats, without whom the king could not govern. Let's examine some of their roles. Because an Egyptian king could not personally oversee every aspect of society, the role of the vizier was established as early as the early dynastic period. The vizier, comparable to a prime minister, delegated responsibilities to other court members, disseminated communications through scribes, and managed military affairs, regional governors' activities, public works projects, and tax collection, among other duties. Huni, the last king of the Third Dynasty, was long believed to have initiated the massive building projects of the Old Kingdom by constructing the Maidum Pyramid. But credit for the Maidum Pyramid is now attributed to Sneferu, the first king of the Fourth Dynasty, who may have been Huni's son by one of his minor queens. Sneferu inaugurated the Old Kingdom's Golden Age, with his most notable achievements being the two pyramids constructed for him at Dashur. Sneferu commenced his pyramid building efforts with the pyramid at Maidum, known as the False Pyramid due to its shape. It more closely resembles a tower than a pyramid, and its outer casing is surrounded by a substantial mound of rubble. The Maidum Pyramid was Egypt's first attempt at a true pyramid, but it proved unsuccessful. This failure resulted from alterations to Imhotep's original pyramid design, causing the outer casing to rest on sand rather than bedrock, leading to its collapse. The Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid are Sneferu's structures at Dashur, or the North Pyramid. The Bent Pyramid derives its name from its distinctive shape. It initially rises at a 55-degree angle, then transitions to a 43-degree angle with smaller stones, creating the impression of bending inward towards the summit. Workers had completed the base and sides before realizing that a 55-degree angle was excessively steep and adjusted their plan to finalize the project as best they could. Sneferu appears to have recognized the issue and proceeded to construct his third pyramid. Sneferu appears to have been a ruler undeterred by setbacks or disappointment. When the Bent Pyramid failed to meet his standards, he promptly initiated work on the Red Pyramid. The Red Pyramid, named for the reddish limestone used in its construction, was built on a solid foundation for improved stability and rose at a 43-degree inclination. The Red Pyramid, standing 105 meters tall, was Egypt's first truly successful true pyramid. It was originally encased in white limestone, as were the later pyramids, but this casing crumbled over time and was repurposed by locals for other construction projects. Following the model of Djoser's complex at Saqqara, Sneferu had mortuary temples and other structures built around his pyramids, with priests overseeing daily operations once the Red Pyramid was completed. All of this underscores the stability of his reign, which he bequeathed to his son Khufu upon his death. Ancient Greek authors referred to Khufu as Cheops, and he is best known for his Great Pyramid at Giza. In their writings, the Greeks depicted him as a tyrant who oppressed his people and forced them to labor for him against their will. This perception may have originated from tales contained in the Westcar Papyrus, a compilation of 4 stories about the kings of the Fourth Dynasty, discovered by Henry Westcar around 1824 CE. The papyrus contains 4 tales recounted by Khufu's sons, including one in which King Khufu summons a sorcerer who claims to be able to reattach a decapitated head to a body, and some scholars interpret his request for a demonstration as malicious or careless. During Khufu's reign, Egypt experienced even greater prosperity due to his military campaigns against Nubia and Libya, as well as lucrative trade agreements with cities such as Byblos. He also invested in agricultural innovations to enhance the livelihoods of his people. During his reign, the world's first documented dam was constructed in Wadi Garawi, a mountain range west of modern Helwan. This dam improved water access for farms and settlements in the region. The Great Pyramid of Giza remains the last of the ancient 7 wonders of the world and a defining symbol of Egypt. It is located on the Giza Plateau near modern Cairo and was constructed over 20 years during Khufu's rule. While numerous hypotheses exist regarding the pyramid's purpose, the most widely accepted theory is that it was built as a tomb for the king. However, the precise methods of its construction remain a mystery to this day. Historians continue to debate the concept of ramps encircling the pyramid's exterior to move the blocks into position. These theories persist despite growing evidence indicating that the pyramid was constructed by the ancient Egyptians using technical methods that were likely so commonplace to them that they felt no need to document them. Nonetheless, the complexity of the interior passages, shafts, and chambers, as well as the nearby Osiris shaft, fuels the persistence of these fringe theories, as does the enigma of how the pyramid was built at all and its precise orientation to cardinal directions. A prominent figure during this period, Hemiunu, served as vizier during Khufu's reign in the 4th dynasty and was a relative of the king. He was responsible for overseeing the construction of the Great Pyramid and monitoring its construction progress, and he was buried near Khufu's pyramid. The construction work of the pyramid was carried out by skilled and unskilled laborers employed by the state for this purpose. These employees either volunteered to pay off debts, performed community service, or were compensated for their time. The annual inundation of the Nile River was crucial for Egyptian survival, as it distributed fertile soil from the riverbank across the adjacent farmlands. However, it also rendered farming those lands impossible during the flood season. During these periods, the government provided work for farmers by undertaking large-scale monument construction projects. These were the individuals who performed the actual physical labor of moving stones, erecting obelisks, constructing temples, and building the pyramids that continue to amaze and inspire people today. Khufu was succeeded by a family member outside the direct line of succession named Djedefre after his death. Djedefre was Khufu's son, but he did not seem to be his designated heir. Some scholars believe Djedefre built the Great Sphinx of Giza, while others attribute it to Khafre, his sibling and successor. The Sphinx is the world's largest monolithic monument, depicting a reclining lion's body with a king's head and face. Historically, this king's visage has been recognized as Khafre's, although Dobrev and others suggest it is Khufu's. The evidence leans towards Khafre as the builder, given its precise alignment with his pyramid complex and the facial resemblance of the Sphinx to Khafre more than Khufu. Khafre's pyramid is the second largest in Giza, and his complex rivals his father's in size. Limited information exists regarding his reign, but Egyptian texts indicate a continuation of his father's policies and governance model, characterized by concentrating authority within his immediate family and maintaining strict control over policies and laws. Following Khafre's passing, the succession faced another temporary disruption when Baka, Djedefre's son, ascended to the throne. His rule was short-lived, lasting less than a year before Menkaure, Khafre's son, succeeded him as monarch. Both Greek and Egyptian writings commend Menkaure. Like his father and grandfather, Menkaure initiated construction on his Giza pyramid and shrine complex. Menkaure's pyramid and complex are smaller than the preceding two, representing a noteworthy shift in the Old Kingdom's history and hinting at one of the factors contributing to its eventual decline. The extensive resources necessary for constructing the Great Pyramid were no longer available during Menkaure's time, but he endeavored to establish a lasting residence comparable to those of his forebears. Tragically, his designated heir and son perished during the pyramid's construction, disrupting the dynastic succession, and Menkaure himself died before his pyramid complex was completed. Despite a reign of 30 years, he was unable to finalize the projects of his predecessors, a situation many historians attribute to the diminishing resources at his disposal. Shepseskaf, Menkaure's successor, completed Menkaure's structure at Giza, but chose to be buried in a relatively modest mastaba at Saqqara. As previously stated, the monarchs channeled immense resources into their funerary structures and edifices, but these temples and sanctuaries increasingly fell under the authority of the priests who managed them, rather than the king. Although the Giza Plateau is currently an ancient, sand-covered area on the outskirts of Cairo, it was once a city of the deceased, actively inhabited by the living who tended to it during Menkaure's era. Giza boasted priests' residences, shrines, worker accommodations, storage facilities, workshops, breweries, and all the amenities of a small metropolis. Civilian life in ancient Egypt was vibrant. The lowest social stratum comprised peasant farmers who lacked ownership of the land they cultivated or the dwellings they inhabited. The monarch, court members, nomarchs, and priests held land ownership. Peasants would typically begin their day with the phrase, "Let us work for the nobility." Peasants were almost exclusively farmers, regardless of any other trade they practiced. They cultivated and harvested crops, surrendering the majority to the landowner while retaining a portion for their sustenance. Most possessed private gardens, tended to by women while the men worked in the fields. This lowest societal level produced the commodities utilized in commerce, sustaining the civilization as a whole. These peasants also constituted part of the workforce responsible for erecting Egypt's pyramids and other monuments. When the Nile River's banks overflowed, hindering farming activities, both men and women were employed in the king's projects. This labor was consistently compensated, and no literary or archaeological evidence substantiates the claim that any of Egypt's major monuments were constructed using slave labor. Work on monumental projects, including pyramids and associated burial complexes, temples, and obelisks, provided the peasantry with the only avenue for upward mobility. Guild painters and engravers in particular were highly sought after in Egypt and received higher wages than unskilled laborers who simply transported stones for construction from one location to another. Peasant farmers could also elevate their status by acquiring a craft and producing vases, bowls, plates, and other ceramics for general use. Skilled carpenters could amass wealth by crafting tables, desks, chairs, beds, and storage chests, while painters were needed to adorn upper-class residences, palaces, tombs, and monuments. Brewers were also highly esteemed, and breweries were occasionally managed by women, particularly in early Egyptian history. Beer was the most prevalent beverage in ancient Egypt and was commonly used as a form of payment. Workers on the Giza Plateau were allocated a beer ration 3 times daily. The deity Osiris was believed to have introduced beer to the people, and brewers were overseen by the goddess Tenenet. Marriages in ancient Egypt were more secular than religious. Parents, across all social classes, arranged the majority of weddings. Girls were often married around the age of 12, and boys around 15. Royal offspring were frequently betrothed to foreign monarchs in infancy to solidify treaties. Ancient Egyptians' lives were not solely devoted to labor. They dedicated ample time to leisure activities, including sports, board games, and other pastimes. Hockey, handball, archery, swimming, tug-of-war, gymnastics, rowing, and a sport known as water jousting. A naval battle conducted in small boats on the Nile, where participants attempted to unseat opponents while teammates maneuvered the boats, were all ancient Egyptian sports. Festivals in ancient Egypt were individually unique based on the occasion, but they shared a common element: drinking and feasting. The Egyptian diet primarily consisted of grains, wheat, and vegetables. Meat was exceptionally expensive, affordable only by royalty. The 4th dynasty concluded with Shepseskaf's brief reign, and the 5th dynasty commenced with diminished optimism. The 5th dynasty is recognized as the Sun King's dynasty, due to the prevalence of the deity Ra's name within their titles, typically rendered as Re. The first 3 rulers, Userkaf, Sahure, and Kakai, would later be celebrated as divinely chosen in the Westcar papyrus tale, The Birth of the Kings. The dynasty began with King Userkaf, but a woman named Kentkos I, likely a daughter of Menkaure, figures prominently in Egyptian texts as the mother of 2 kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, although the identities of these monarchs remain unclear. Her monument is the 4th Pyramid of Giza, indicating her significant status. Limited information is available about her. Userkaf is most renowned for his work on the Temple of the Sun at Abu Ghorab. This structure marks a significant departure from the monarchs standing at the beginning of the 4th dynasty, and signals the gradual decline of Giza as the royal necropolis. The sun deity Ra was now directly venerated by the populace through the priesthood, diminishing the king's role as the god's primary representative. Userkaf's son, Sahur, succeeded him and constructed his funerary complex at Abu Sir, near the Temple of the Sun. Sahur was a capable monarch who led the first Egyptian expedition to Punt and negotiated substantial trade agreements with other nations. Punt, in particular, became one of his greatest achievements. evolving into a crucial source of many of Egypt's most valuable resources and eventually regarded as a mythical land of the gods. Sahure constructed his own temple to the sun in Abusir and was the first to incorporate palmiform columns into construction, which later became standard for columns throughout Egypt. Sahure's military exploits and prudent resource management enriched the nation, evidenced by the intricate craftsmanship of his mortuary complex and the inscriptions discovered there. His son, Neferkare Kakai, succeeded him. Inscriptions suggest he was a virtuous and well-regarded king, but little is known of his reign, except for the increasing dominance of the priesthood during his rule. His son, Neferefre, succeeded him, but died young, possibly around the age of 20. He was succeeded by King Shepseskare. Nusere-Ini succeeded him, and the priests of Ra gained even greater authority during his reign. The bureaucracy associated with temples and mortuary buildings also expanded, placing a burden on royal coffers, which funded sanctuary upkeep and maintenance. Menkaure-Kayu succeeded him, but little is known about his rule beyond the fact that he was the last monarch to construct a temple to the sun. Djedkare-Sesi succeeded him in the late 25th to mid-24th century BC. Djedkare-Sesi's origins are uncertain. He is not considered Menkaure-Kayu's son, but may have been related. To maintain economic stability, he implemented extensive reforms of the administration and clergy during his rule. Djedkare-Sesi abandoned the customary practice of erecting a shrine to the sun deity and reduced the number of clerics required for maintaining funerary structures. He also orchestrated a second Punt expedition, which enriched Egypt and strengthened relations with Punt. However, the most significant aspect of Djedkare-Sesi's reign was the decentralization of government in Memphis, granting local authorities, the nomarchs, more autonomy. Djedkare-Sesi was succeeded by his son Unas, whose reign is sparsely documented. Unas was the first Egyptian king to have the interior of his tomb decorated and inscribed with what became known as the pyramid texts. These inscriptions depict the king in communion with Ra and Osiris. The king's position was already considerably diminished when the 6th dynasty began. Local officials and bureaucrats constructed more elaborate tombs than nobles during the reign of the first monarch, Teti. Teti was assassinated by his bodyguards, according to the 3rd century BCE historian Manetho, an act that would have been unthinkable previously. He was succeeded by Userkare, who may have been implicated in the assassination plot. His reign was brief, and he was followed by Pepi I, during whose reign the nomarchs gained further authority. By the Old Kingdom's end, political power had become fragmented, and the system was decentralized. The restoration of central power was a protracted process extending well into the 12th dynasty. Due to the breakdown of central power, political authority devolved to the nomarchs, who assumed complete control. This pattern persisted throughout the reigns of Merenre, Nemtiemsa-Frafirs, and Neferkare Pepi II, who ascended to the throne as a child and died as an elderly man, marking an exceptionally long reign of nearly a century. During Pepi II's extended rule, the Old Kingdom gradually disintegrated. The growing influence of provincial nomarchs and the clergy eroded the central government's and the king's authority. Pepi II was succeeded by Merenre Nemtiemsa II, whose reign was very short, and the dynasty concluded with Nitikerti, identified by some scholars and Egyptologists as the Queen Nitocris from Herodotus's account of an Egyptian queen who avenged her brother's murder by drowning his killers at a banquet. Pepi II had outlived any potential heirs to the throne and appears to have been a largely ineffective monarch in his later years. When drought caused famine in the country, there was no effective central authority to respond. The Old Kingdom ended with the 6th dynasty because no powerful ruler ascended to the throne to guide the people. Local authorities focused on their own regions and lacked the resources and motivation to assist the rest of the nation. As the 6th dynasty faded, Egypt gradually descended into the First Intermediate Period. The First Intermediate Period is primarily characterized by the ascendance of provincial administrators in distinct regions and a decline in the central government's power in Memphis. The grand structures of the Old Kingdom, on the scale of Giza's pyramids, were no longer constructed during the First Intermediate Period because there was no strong central sovereign to commission and finance them, nor an administration to manage the massive workforce. The cultural image derived from historical data does not portray a chaotic dark age, but rather a different social and political model than what preceded it. Some historical evidence supports claims of unrest and perceived disorder, primarily stemming from the absence of a singular powerful central government. The country's various regions were essentially self-governing. The scarcity of information about the kings of the 7th and 8th dynasties attests to their ineffectiveness. Their identities and dates faded from Egyptian annals. The ancient city of Memphis was abandoned at some point by rulers who viewed themselves as the heirs of the Old Kingdom kings. The rulers of the 9th and 10th dynasties then established Heracleopolis as their center and proclaimed themselves the legitimate kings of Egypt. Intef I, a Theban nomarch who held the customary titles of Great Overlord of the Nome and Overseer of Priests, rose to prominence in Thebes around 2125 BC and challenged the authority of the Heracleopolitan kings. Intef I established Egypt's 11th dynasty and initiated the momentum towards the country's reunification during the Middle Kingdom. He was known as Intef the Great, and a monument in his honor was erected in the Temple of Karnak, marking the path towards the beginning of a new era, the Middle Kingdom. Mentuhotep II, known as the Second Mentu, unified Egypt and ushered in the Middle Kingdom period. The groundwork for this unification was laid by Intef I and his successors. Mentuhotep Rome, approximately 2115 BCE, followed in Intef I's footsteps and conquered the neighboring nomes for Thebes, significantly enhancing the city's stature and strength. His initiatives were continued by his predecessors. Mentuhotep II leveraged these early victories to ultimately defeat Heracleopolis and subsequently punish those nomes that had remained loyal to the old kings while rewarding those that had honored Thebes. 108th, Mentuhotep II devoted his time after the unification process to ruling, military achievements, and construction projects. Mentuhotep's successor, Mentuhotep III, reigned from 2010 to 1998 BCE, maintaining and expanding his programs. He dispatched an army to Punt and fortified the northern delta's borders. Mentuhotep IV succeeded him. His entire 7-year rule is sparsely documented, but he likely continued his predecessor's policies effectively, as the nation was thriving when Amenemhat I succeeded him as monarch. Amenemhat I was Mentuhotep IV's vizier and was sent on a mission to quarry stones for the king's project. He had an inscription created detailing extraordinary events he witnessed. First, a gazelle gave birth on the stone selected for the king's sarcophagus, indicating the stone's auspiciousness as it was imbued with the essence of life. Second, an unexpected rainfall occurred during the celebration, revealing a well large enough to water the entire gathering. This inscription was later interpreted to mean that Amenemhat was divinely chosen by the gods to become king, as the gods had allowed him to witness miracles. Amenemhat I abandoned Thebes for unknown reasons and established his court in Ichtawi, south of Memphis. Amenemhat I's successor, Senusret, 1971 to 1926 BCE, improved the country's infrastructure and initiated the grand building projects that had characterized the Old Kingdom, symbolizing the king's power, including a temple to Amun at Karnak, which initiated the construction of the Great Temple complex there. Amenemhat I had followed in the footsteps of Intef II and Mentuhotep II by curtailing the authority of local nomarchs and priests, concentrating power among his most trusted family members. Senusret continued this strategy. The administration of the 12th dynasty was so effective that, unlike the Old Kingdom, it maintained centralized wealth with the monarch while fostering the development and prosperity of individual regions without allowing them to become overly powerful. The king governed all of Egypt, but specific officials were rewarded for their loyalty. The Egyptians developed various advanced irrigation systems and, to monitor water levels, constructed nilometers to measure flood height and determine appropriate tax levels. The king governed all of Egypt, but specific officials were rewarded for their loyalty. The Egyptians developed various advanced irrigation systems and, to monitor water levels, constructed nilometers to measure flood height and determine appropriate tax levels. Senusret I was succeeded by Amenemhat II, 1929 to 1895 BCE, who may have co-ruled with him. The practice of co-regency was unique to the Middle Kingdom, where a younger man, typically the monarch's chosen heir, usually a son, would govern alongside the king to learn the position and ensure a smooth transition of power. Scholars debate the extent to which this practice was consistently followed. although there is no doubt it was implemented by Amenemhat II and his successor, Senusret II, 1897 to 1878 BCE. Dual dates for these two rulers on official cartouches suggest co-regency. Amenemhat II's reign is sparsely documented, but Senusret II is noted for his excellent relations with the regional nomarchs and the improved prosperity of the nation. It is noteworthy that during Senusret II's rule, local officials thrived, mirroring the situation at the end of the Old Kingdom. But this did not cause the kingdom the same difficulties as before. Senusret II was succeeded by Senusret III, 1878 to 1860 BCE, the most potent monarch of the period, whose reign was so prosperous that he was deified during his lifetime. His rule is characterized by military expansion into Nubia as well as a surge in Egypt's wealth and influence. Senusret III exemplified the Egyptian cultural value of military prowess and decisive action, representing the epitome of the warrior king. He was considered invincible at the head of his troops. His expeditions into Nubia expanded Egypt's borders, and the fortifications he erected along the boundary facilitated commerce. He also conducted an expedition into Palestine, resulting in improved trade relations for that region. To control floods and manage irrigation waters, the ancient Egyptians constructed earth and stone barrages and dams, such as El Lahoun Dam, erected during the reign of King Amenemhat III, who ruled in the 12th dynasty following Senusret III's reign. Amenemhat III aimed to effectively utilize floodwaters for the irrigation system and to protect the state from destructive high levels of inundation. Early November, before the water had fully receded from the basins, marked the beginning of preparations for the planting season. Before fields were readied for planting, irrigation facilities were repaired or cleared, and property lines were reevaluated. As ancient Egyptians were known to meticulously document every detail of their daily lives, we have detailed depictions of the process of growing and harvesting grain in various tomb paintings. Diverse crops were widely cultivated, contributing to food abundance in Egypt, including emmer wheat, used for bread and beer, grapes for wine, palm dates, dome palms, figs, sycamore figs, and papyrus, whose stems were used to create paper-like scrolls for writing and were also excellent material for making sails, cords, and even mats. Farmers employed various tools during the planting process, including a fascinating device called a shadoof. It is a hand-operated tool used to lift water from the river, consisting of a long pole with a bucket suspended on a rope from one end and a counterweight attached to the other. It was used to fill jugs with water for transport or to direct water into small canals along ditches. It is natural to wonder how such an ancient civilization managed to erect colossal buildings and move immense statues without the advanced technology we possess today. Scenes from the tombs of high officials provide evidence of the process of moving massive statues. Jehutihotep, a nomarch of the 12th dynasty, who governed the 15th nome of Upper Egypt, features a captivating scene in his tomb depicting the transportation of a roughly 6.8 meter high monument of himself by 172 people using ropes on a sledge, an endeavor facilitated by pouring water in front of the sledge. Unfortunately, no archaeological evidence of this colossus has ever been discovered. Amenemhat III boasted no major military triumphs, but constructed nearly as many monuments as his father, and was responsible for the extensive mortuary sanctuary at Hawara, known as the Labyrinth. Amenemhat IV, 1815 to 1807 BCE, succeeded him and continued his policies. He completed his father's construction projects and initiated many of his own. During his reign, military and commercial expeditions were undertaken on numerous occasions, and trade flourished with towns in the Levant, particularly Byblos and elsewhere. The co-regency policy, if consistently implemented, should have ensured a seamless transfer of power from ruler to ruler, but it failed in the case of Amenemhat IV, who had no male successor to prepare for succession after his death. The throne passed to his sister, or possibly wife, Sobekneferu, 1807 to 1802 BCE, whose rule is sparsely documented, unless the Queen Nitocris of the 6th dynasty of the Old Kingdom is accepted as historical. Sobekneferu was the first woman to govern Egypt since the early dynastic period. The 12th dynasty concluded with her death without an heir, and the 13th dynasty began with the reign of Sobekotep I, 1802 to 1800 BCE. The Middle Kingdom's 12th dynasty was its most powerful and wealthy period. The 13th dynasty inherited the riches and policies but proved unable to effectively utilize them. The 13th dynasty appears to have maintained the policies of the 12th dynasty monarchs and preserved national unity, but none of its rulers possessed the personal authority of the preceding kings. According to incomplete records, Lower Egypt began to develop its own political factions. This era commences when the Egyptian rulers of the 13th dynasty relocated the capital from Ichtawi to Thebes, the former capital of the late 11th dynasty in Upper Egypt, thereby weakening their control over the north. Amenemhat I, 1991 to 1962 BCE, had established the small settlement of Hutwarid in the far north at the beginning of the 12th dynasty, which evolved into a commercial hub with convenient access to the sea and road routes to Sinai and the Palestine region. During the 13th dynasty, robust trade and immigration led to an increase in Semitic people and avarice, who eventually grew wealthy and powerful enough to exert governmental influence in the nation. These individuals were known to the Egyptians as Heka Kasut, or Hyksos. The origin of the Hyksos remains unclear, with numerous hypotheses proposed, including the possibility that they were refugees fleeing the Aryan invasion of Asia. However, the Nordic invasion hypothesis has been discredited, as has this assertion. The Egyptians referred to them as Asiatics, but this was a broad term used for anyone beyond the country's eastern border, from the Levant to Mesopotamia. During the late 13th dynasty, the Egyptian monarchs ceased providing resources to the border fortifications located in Nubia, and no additional soldiers were stationed there. The troops already stationed at the forts were never recalled to Egypt, and the former garrisons became their permanent residences. These troops functioned as trade intermediaries between the Egyptian city of Thebes and the Kingdom of Kush. As the 13th dynasty neglected affairs in the south, mirroring their neglect of the north, the Kingdom of Kush developed into a centralized power with its capital at Kerma. Some of the ancient Egyptian fortifications along the border were destroyed at some point, presumably during an assault, although this remains uncertain. What is evident is that as the Egyptian government in Thebes disregarded Kush's influence in the south, Kush's power grew, and the border became more porous. The troops left behind no longer considered it their duty to defend against invasions and became more accustomed to the role of traders than military personnel. By this point, the monarchs documented for the latter part of the 13th and 16th dynasties are non-Egyptians, or at the very least lack Egyptian names, and are considered Hyksos rulers. Their timeline is confused, and some names are only known from ceremonial artifacts, while others are only known from fragments of king lists, making dating problematic. The Hyksos achieved economic dominance over the eastern delta and then expanded northward, negotiating treaties and forging agreements with various nomarch governors of other districts in Lower Egypt until they had conquered a substantial amount of territory and could assert political authority. Once established in Avaris, the Hyksos elevated Egyptians to positions of power, adopted Egyptian customs and attire, and incorporated Egyptian deity worship into their own beliefs and ceremonies. The Hyksos monarchs established Egypt's 15th dynasty. However, upon successfully expelling them, the conquering Thebans undertook a systematic obliteration of all vestiges of Hyksos' presence within Egypt. Consequently, the names of only a handful of Hyksos rulers remain known, preserved through fragmented inscriptions and scattered texts unearthed at Avaris and other locations. Among these few, Apepi stands out as the most recognized. Apepi, also known as Apophis, bore an Egyptian name, resonating with the colossal serpent Apophis, or Apep, the archenemy of the sun deity Ra. Simultaneous to the Hyksos' rise in northern Egypt, the Nubians were also consolidating power in the south. The Middle Kingdom's 13th dynasty, mirroring the oversight of Lower Egypt, had neglected its southern border. Thebes remained the capital of Upper Egypt, but instead of presiding over a unified nation, it found itself caught between the Hyksos in the north and the Nubians in the south. According to Manetho, Apepi of the Hyksos dispatched a missive to the Theban king Sekenenre Tao de Seku around 1530 BCE, demanding the cessation of a hippopotamus pool to the east of the city, claiming it disturbed his sleep day and night. This message likely alluded to the Theban tradition of hippopotamus hunting, an act deemed offensive by the Hyksos, who venerated Set and incorporated the hippopotamus into their religious observances. Sekenenre Tao II, instead of heeding this request, interpreted it as a challenge to his authority and initiated a march towards Avaris. His mummy bears testament to his death in battle. This, in conjunction with subsequent events, suggests the Thebans were defeated in this initial confrontation. Tao's son, Kamosi, took up the mantle, expressing his bitter lament in an inscription regarding the imposition of Asiatic taxes and the challenges posed by external entities to his north and south. He launched a substantial assault on the Hyksos, purportedly leading to the destruction of Avaris. The narrative recounts Kamosi's boast that his attack was so swift and terrifying it rendered Hyksos women infertile and reduced the city to rubble. However, this account appears embellished, as the Hyksos retained dominion over Lower Egypt for 3 years after Kamosi's incursion, and Avaris continued to serve as their stronghold. Kamos was succeeded by his brother, Ahmose I, who, according to inscriptions, ultimately expelled the Hyksos from Egypt and razed their metropolis of Avaris. These events are documented in the tomb inscriptions of Ahmose, son of Abana, a soldier who served under King Ahmose I. He vividly describes the devastation of Avaris and the Hyksos retreat towards Sharuhan and the region of Palestine. Ahmose I then laid siege to this city for 6 years, until the Hyksos once again fled, this time towards Syria, their subsequent fate remaining unknown. Ahmose I not only founded the 18th dynasty, but also inaugurated the New Kingdom of Egypt, the epoch of the Egyptian Empire. The Hyksos inadvertently played a role in the formation of a professional Egyptian army of conquest. Ahmose I, and those who followed him, were determined to ensure no foreign nation ever again achieved such dominance in their land. The triumph that would blossom into the New Kingdom, an era of unparalleled prosperity and success for Egypt, stands as the enduring legacy of the Second Intermediate Period. The 18th dynasty of Egypt, established by Ahmose I, would erect some of the most celebrated and unforgettable monuments since the Old Kingdom's pyramids and expand Egypt's borders into a vast kingdom. Ahmose, I recognize that the Hyksos had managed to establish themselves so firmly because previous Egyptian monarchs had allowed it. Consequently, he resolved to create protected zones around Egypt's frontiers, fortifying neglected settlements in strategically crucial locations to safeguard the nation. Ahmose I's war against the Hyksos brought him and his forces into contact with Palestine and Syria, where he continued his military campaigns, while simultaneously launching military excursions south against the Kingdom of Kush and Nubia. Upon his demise, he had secured the nation and solidified his power, bequeathing a stable political and economic environment to his successor, Amenhotep I, 1541 to 1520 BCE. Inscriptions reveal that Amenhotep I adhered to his father's policies, emulating him as a warrior monarch, although he likely only commanded military engagements in Nubia. There are no records of him leading expeditions into Palestine or Syria, but it remains plausible that he did, as these areas remained secure throughout his and his successors' reigns. Thutmose I, 1520 to 1492 BCE, succeeded him and promptly initiated wars to extend Egypt's reach. Thutmose I quelled a revolt in Nubia that erupted shortly after his ascension, personally executing the Nubian monarch and suspending his body from the prow of his vessel as a deterrent to other potential rebels. He then further extended Egypt's dominion over Nubia southward, before redirecting his focus to Palestine and Syria. He expanded Thebes' renowned Temple of Karnak and constructed numerous other temples and structures across Egypt. Thutmose II, 1492 to 1479 BCE, succeeded him, but his rule is largely overshadowed by his more influential half-sister, Hatshepsut, 1479 to 1458 BCE. Hatshepsut was one of the most potent and effective rulers of the New Kingdom. Thutmose II had one offspring with her and another with a minor woman, Thutmose III, whom he designated as his successor, 1458 to 1425 BCE. Following Thutmose II's death, Hatshepsut was appointed regent of Egypt and officially co-ruled with Thutmose III. However, she had been the driving force behind her husband's reign and continued to govern according to her own judgment after his passing. Hatshepsut spearheaded numerous construction initiatives. She orchestrated the most successful expedition to Punt, augmented the Temple of Karnak with her own works, and governed harmoniously in the south. Her construction endeavors were so magnificent and profuse that later pharaohs claimed ownership of them. They were able to do so because Hatshepsut's name was erased from all her structures, including her magnificent complex at Deir el-Bahari around 1458 BCE. Regarding the obelisks erected in various temples, they served as symbols of the sun god, and countless examples can be found across the globe, whether genuine Egyptian relics or modern imitations of ancient Egyptian obelisks. The process of carving one is not an enigma, as an unfinished obelisk remains in the granite quarries of Aswan. Hatshepsut commissioned its construction, likely to accompany what became known as the Lateran obelisk, originally located at Karnak, but subsequently relocated to the Lateran Palace in Rome. Thutmose III inherited a prosperous and secure nation in 1458 BCE and immediately embarked on its further improvement. Thutmose III established the Egyptian Empire, which his descendants would maintain. He vanquished neighboring countries and expanded Egypt's dominion to unprecedented levels, employing the war chariot acquired from the Hyksos, bronze weaponry, and superior military tactics. Over 2 decades, he spearheaded at least 17 distinct military campaigns, subjugating kingdoms from Libya to Syria and extending Egyptian authority in the south from the region around Buhan down to Kyrgyz. Upon Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III ascended to sole power. Believing him to be weak and inexperienced, the king of the Syrian city of Kadesh incited a revolt in the Egyptian province of Canaan, which swiftly garnered support from other regions, aiming to unseat Egypt's dominance. This coalition converged in the city of Megiddo. Thutmose III marched his army from Thebes to Megiddo in northern Canaan, shrewdly selecting a narrow pass from the town of Aruna instead of the wider and more accessible routes to the city. He surprised his adversaries by entering the Nile Valley behind their defensive positions and routing them from the battlefield. Thutmose III then had to lay siege to the city to secure its capture. Jehuti, who served as Thutmose III's commander and military scribe, naturally accompanied his monarch in war to suppress the rebellion and authored a record detailing the conflict. Thutmose III was so captivated by Jehuti's account that he had excerpts of it inscribed on the walls of the great temple of Amun at Karnak and, to a lesser extent, elsewhere. Jehuti commences by acknowledging the presence of writings on the temple's walls. He then proceeds to elucidate the campaign and its underlying motivations. The wretched adversary, referenced repeatedly, is the king of Kadesh, who initiated the revolt and assembled armies against Egypt. But the designation also applies to all those who joined the rebellion at various junctures. Following the Battle of Megiddo, Thutmose III would subdue and punish those who participated, capturing not only Kadesh, but also the entirety of Syria and the Mitanni territories in Mesopotamia. He was succeeded by his son, Amenhotep II, 1425 to 1400 BCE, who inherited and built upon his father's formidable and secure kingdom. While not a warrior king in the same mold, he commissioned numerous construction endeavors and ratified peace treaties and trade agreements with other nations, such as Mitanni. Thutmose IV, 1400 to 1390 BCE, his successor, continued his programs, based on interpretations of his renowned dream stele, which recounts the narrative of his ascension to the kingdom. Thutmose IV is considered by some to be a usurper, despite being the legitimate son of Amenhotep II. He is best known as the king who rebuilt Giza's Great Sphinx. He was followed by Amenhotep III, 1386 to 1353 BCE, who is regarded as one of Egypt's most effective and powerful rulers. Amenhotep III governed Egypt during its artistic, political, and fiscal apogee. His reign was among the most opulent in Egyptian history, and he frequently employed his vast wealth to persuade other nations to align with his desires. He maintained national stability, expanded its borders, and dedicated himself to the arts and construction initiatives. Many of Egypt's most impressive structures originate from his rule. However, during his reign, the priests of Amun began to accumulate increasing fortune. They possessed more property than the monarch and utilized it to further enrich themselves. Amenhotep III attempted to restrain their growing influence by aligning himself with Aten, a minor deity symbolized by a sun disk. He seemingly believed that emphasizing the pharaoh's authority through the worship of Aten would elevate the status of Aten's priests above those of Amun. His scheme ultimately faltered in diminishing Amun's priesthood, but it did elevate the deity Aten, who would assume a pivotal role in the rule of Amenhotep's son and successor. Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten, was an Egyptian pharaoh renowned for establishing monotheism and abolishing the ancient pantheon of gods. His rule became known as the Amarna period because the Egyptian capital was relocated from Thebes to modern-day Amarna. He ascended to the kingdom as Amenhotep IV, but changed his name to Akhenaten in the 4th or 5th year of his rule. He dissolved the traditional religion, particularly the veneration of Amun, and elevated the deity Aten to the position of the sole true god. Only the cult of Aten was recognized as a legitimate religious organization. All other sanctuaries were shuttered, and their veneration was outlawed. He erected a shrine to Aten at Karnak's great temple of Amun, which he also closed down. His wife was the celebrated Nefertiti, best known for the magnificent bust crafted by the sculptor Thutmose. Upon Akhenaten's death, he was succeeded by his young son, Tutankhaten, 1336 to 1327 BCE, who swiftly changed his name to Tutankhamun. Ascending to the throne at a mere 9 years old, the young leader relocated the capital to Memphis, reinstated Thebes as a religious center, which also held political significance, reopened the temples, and restored Egypt's ancient religion. Although he instituted significant changes that helped secure the nation, he is best known for his magnificent tomb, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922. Tutankhamun was married to Ankhesenamun, his half-sister, until his demise at approximately 18 years of age. Ankhesenamun may then have married the vizier I, possibly 1324 to 1320 BCE, who some scholars believe succeeded Tutankhamun, or she may have attempted to reign independently. Whatever part I played in the succession, Ankhesenamun vanished soon after Tutankhamun's death, and the general Horemheb seized control, dedicating himself to restoring Egypt to its former grandeur. Horemheb, 1320 to 1295 BCE, implemented two significant measures to erase the Amarna period rulers from Egyptian history. This involved burning all of Akhenaten's statues and writings, including completely demolishing his sanctuary. He championed traditional Egyptian religion and customs. Relationships with other countries and Egypt's infrastructure had suffered neglect during Akhenaten's rule. Horemheb returned Egypt to its previous glory, although he was unable to fully elevate it back to the heights of Amenhotep III's reign. He perished without an heir, and his vizier, Parameses, claimed the kingdom as Rameses I, establishing the 19th dynasty. Rameses I was an elderly man upon ascending to the kingdom, and he quickly designated his son Seti I as his successor. Rameses I resumed Horemheb's task of rebuilding Egypt's sanctuaries and shrines, as well as expanding the vast temple of Amun at Karnak. He granted Seti I the authority to lead military missions to reclaim territories lost during Akhenaten's rule. Upon his passing, Seti I ascended to the throne and continued Egypt's reform and revival, adding his own touches to the grand project at Karnak and grooming his successor for dominance. His son, Rameses II, 1279 to 1213 BCE. Rameses II stands as the most renowned pharaoh of Egypt today. Rameses II governed Egypt for 67 years, and the magnificent temples and monuments he erected in celebration of his conquests and achievements still stand as a testament to the opulence of his reign. Hardly any ancient Egyptian site exists that does not bear mention of Rameses II, and the narrative of his triumph in the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BC is legendary. However, one of his greatest acts as pharaoh was not one of combat but of peace, the forging of the first peace treaty in recorded history. Anatolia's Hittites had been gaining prominence since the second millennium BC, and by 1530 BC they had surpassed Babylonia as a notable nation and were challenging Egypt's supremacy. Letters of intent had been addressed to the 18th dynasty king Akhenaten, but he had never responded to or acknowledged Hittite activities along his borders. Horemheb had waged unsuccessful campaigns against the Hittites, who had grown even more formidable by the time of Tutankhamun, Akhenaten's successor, and were audacious enough to garrison districts on or near Egypt's frontiers. When Horemheb became pharaoh in 1320 BCE, he initiated a more forceful campaign against the Hittites and secured Egypt's borders, although the issue of Hittite incursions was never fully resolved. Seti I had regained Palestine and Kadesh for Egypt, but, content with the victory, had neglected to plan for the city's defense. Now, Ramesses II of the 19th dynasty had to grapple with the problem of Hittite incursions and assembled his forces at Pi-Ramesses in 1274 BC to dislodge the Hittites from Kadesh and weaken their army. Leading 4 divisions totaling 20,000 soldiers in his chariot, Ramesses II marched his vanguard division so rapidly that he soon outpaced the other 3 near Kadesh. 2 Bedouins were apprehended and interrogated about the whereabouts of Muwatalli II and his army. They responded that the army was nowhere near Kadesh and that Muwatalli II feared Egypt and the young king. However, these individuals were Hittite spies, and Muwatalli too had already fortified Kadesh with his chariots, 3,500, and troops, 37,000 men, positioned just beyond the next hill. According to some combat accounts, Ramesses II captured additional spies who divulged the grim reality of his predicament, but this intelligence arrived too late. Ramesses II had become separated from the rest of his army in his haste to seize Kadesh and vanquish the Hittite ruler. Just as the Hittite chariots slammed into his camp, he dispatched messages to the other 3 divisions. The Ptah division arrived in time to avert an Egyptian army rout, and Ramesses II personally led the remaining Amun division into action repeatedly, driving the Hittite soldiers back towards the Orontes River, where many perished. Muwatalli II initially advanced from Kadesh's walls to ensnare Ramesses II's forces between his army by the river and his advancing troops, but for unexplained reasons, he chose to remain within the city and never committed his reserve forces to the fray. Ramesses II proclaimed a resounding triumph at Kadesh and commissioned a scribe to record his narrative of the wonderful fight. Muwatalli II's account differed substantially, most notably claiming Kadesh as a Hittite victory. While Ramesses II did not recapture the city, he decisively broke the Hittite army on the battlefield, and while Muwatalli II retained possession of Kadesh, he did not annihilate the Egyptians as he had intended. Merneptah was Ramesses II's 12th son, not his designated successor. He only ascended to pharaoh because all of his elder siblings had predeceased their father during his lengthy rule. Merneptah swiftly adopted his father's persona of a warrior monarch, defeating the Libyans in combat and repelling an assault by the Sea Peoples. His accounts of his exploits include the well-known Merneptah Stele, which contains the first recorded mention of the Israelites as a distinct tribe. Moving ahead to the 20th dynasty, Ramesses III emerged as the new kingdom's last powerful king. After Horemheb restored the ancient faith, the priests of Amun's authority grew steadily, diverting income and influence away from the monarchy throughout the Ramesside era of the 20th dynasty. This situation deteriorated progressively. The looming threat of the Sea Peoples was remarkably increasing, compelling Ramesses III to declare war against them. The Sea Peoples' nationality remains shrouded in mystery, as the only records of their activities stem from Egyptian sources, which solely describe them in the context of battle, such as the record from the Tanis Stele, which reads, in part, "They came from the sea in their warships, and none could stand against them." This is characteristic of Egyptian allusions to these enigmatic invaders. Ramesses II, his son and successor Merneptah, and Ramesses III are the 3 great pharaohs who chronicled their struggles and triumphs against the Sea Peoples. All proclaimed resounding victories over their adversaries, and their inscriptions encompass the most extensive documentation of the Sea Peoples. During the reign of Pharaoh Ramesses III, the Sea Peoples invaded and destroyed the Egyptian trade hub at Kadesh, and subsequently attempted to invade Egypt itself once more. They initiated their operations with rapid raids along the coastline before advancing towards the delta. In 1180 BC, Ramesses III subdued them, but they returned in force. Ramesses III would have been keenly aware of his predecessor's conflicts with these people and their inherent violence. He decided against a conventional field engagement and instead employed guerrilla tactics as his strategy. He established ambushes along the coast and the Nile Delta, and his archers proved particularly effective, positioned in camouflage along the beach to rain down arrows upon the enemy ships upon his signal. The ships were set ablaze with flaming arrows once the crews were incapacitated or drowning. Following the decisive defeat of the naval invasion, Rameses III turned his focus to the remaining invading troops on land. He utilized the same tactics as before, and in 1178 BC, the Sea Peoples were decisively defeated off the coast of Jahi. Egyptian annals once again depict a spectacular victory in which numerous Sea Peoples were slaughtered, and others were captured and conscripted into the Egyptian army and fleet or sold into slavery. Although Rameses III spared Egypt from invasion, the battle proved so costly that the royal treasury was depleted, and the tomb builders at Deir el-Medina were unable to be paid. This precipitated the first documented labor strike in history, in which workers ceased work and refused to return until they received proper compensation. Subsequently, the momentum of the Egyptian empire began to fade. Rameses III maintained a powerful central authority, secured the borders, and kept Egypt prosperous, but the kingdom was demonstrably crumbling around him. The office of the Pharaoh of Egypt no longer commanded the same level of reverence it once did, because the priests of Amun served as intermediaries between the gods. Ramesses III sustained injuries in an assassination attempt orchestrated by one of his lesser spouses and perished as a result of these injuries. Rameses IV, 1155 to 1149 BCE, ascended to the throne only after his elder siblings had died. He attempted to emulate the great pharaohs of the past and did complete several construction projects while struggling to maintain the empire's declining territory, but he died after a brief rule. He was succeeded by his son Rameses V, who fought to retain control against Amun's priests and preserve the kingdom's unity. His successor, Rameses VI, continued this struggle with limited success. Rameses VII replaced him, followed by Rameses VIII, about whom little is known. Rameses IX, Rameses X, and Rameses XI all fought to keep the kingdom intact in the face of external incursions and internal conflicts with Amun's priests. One incident related to these struggles, though obscure, involves a man named Amenhotep, high priest of Amun, who was deposed by the vizier Panahisi and forced to flee south to Nubia. What remains certain is that the priests of Amun retained immense power and eventually ascended to the throne of Egypt and ruled the country. Smendes, 1077 to 1051 BCE, a ruler of Lower Egypt who governed from Tanis, succeeded Rameses X. Following Egyptian custom, a monarch was buried by his successor, and Smendes asserted his legal right to govern by relocating the capital from Pi Rameses to Tanis. However, by this time, the priests of Thebes had grown powerful enough to assert their own authority to rule, and the nation was divided between Tanis's control over Lower Egypt and Thebes's rule over Upper Egypt. Contrary to popular belief, this division did not culminate in civil conflict or internal strife. Smendes was sufficiently powerful to be recognized, but his control extended only over Lower Egypt and not even its entirety. He governed concurrently with the high priest of Thebes, Herihor, who reigned from approximately 1080 to 1074 BCE. Herihor was a general of the troops, as were all Amun's high priests, but his influence extended little beyond Thebes. This would become the prevailing model for the majority of the Third Intermediate Period. Individual nomarchs were strengthened at the expense of any semblance of central government, as in the First Intermediate Period, and neither Tanis nor Thebes managed to exert significant influence over the nation as a whole. The 22nd dynasty, which governed publicly under Libyan titles, was also of Libyan origin. Shoshenq I, 943 to 922 BCE, established it after reunifying Egypt and embarking on military campaigns reminiscent of Egypt's imperial heyday. Shoshenqian reformed Tanis's administration and Thebes's clergy. The clergy would no longer be a hereditary position, but rather one of nomination by the monarch, as would be the selection of the god's wife of Amun. His military operations revitalized Egypt's economy, and the nation began to approach the Egypt of the New Kingdom during his reign. Osorkon II ascended to the throne in 872 BCE and maintained national unity, but after his rule, Egypt fractured into distinct kingdoms governing from Heracleopolis, Tanis, Sais, Memphis and Hermopolis in Lower Egypt, and Thebes in Upper Egypt to the south. The Kushite ruler Kashta, 750 BCE, recognized Egypt's vulnerability and moved to capitalize on it. Kashta revered Egyptian culture and had Egyptianized his capital city of Napata and consequently his entire territory. He maintained strong trade connections with Thebes and was well versed in the protocol of appointing priests and other high officials. Paye, 747 to 721 BCE, his son, strengthened Nubian dominance of Upper Egypt, and when the kings of Lower Egypt protested, he commanded a large army against them. Paye conquered Lower Egypt, capturing and subjugating all of the main towns before marching back to Napata. Egypt was now legally under his rule, but he permitted the Lower Egyptian kings to regroup and reestablish their power. These buffer zones diminished during the Third Intermediate Period, and Egypt lost its former strength. But there were still countries on its border, such as Judah and Israel, that served a similar purpose. The subjugation of these areas by Shoshenqirais pushed Egypt's border up against the Assyrians, with no buffer in between. Moving forward to the 26th dynasty, Psamtik. I was a powerful ruler who instilled in his people a sense of the grandeur of Egypt's past by restoring it through massive projects, renovations, restorations, and military feats. His son, Necho II, 610 to 595 BCE, upheld his father's legacy by engaging in military campaigns, commissioning construction projects, and expanding the armed forces. Recognizing that Egyptians were not traditionally adept seafarers, Necho II strategically established a fleet composed of Greek mercenaries, which proved to be quite effective. Necho II is frequently depicted as a formidable warrior and military leader who fortified the nation he inherited. During the reign of Amasis II, he successfully reformed government spending, while simultaneously stimulating the economy and directing military operations. Egypt united under his leadership and once again flourished, boasting a thriving economy, secure borders, and prosperous commerce. Construction projects, temples, and various works of art were completed, and Egypt's reputation regained some of its lost splendor. He was succeeded by his son, Psamtik III, 526 BCE, who was a young and inexperienced king, ill-prepared for the challenges he would face. Cambyses II, the Persian monarch, had dispatched envoys to Amasis, requesting one of his daughters as a bride. However, Amasis, unwilling to comply yet seeking to avoid confrontation, sent a priest's daughter instead, who was of his predecessor's lineage. This former Egyptian princess was deeply offended by Amasis's deception, particularly as it had long been Egyptian policy not to transfer noble women to foreign monarchs as wives. Upon her arrival at Cambyses II's palace, she revealed her true identity, and Cambyses II vowed to avenge Amasis's insult by sending him a false bride. In contrast to Cambyses, Darius sought to govern Egypt even in his absence. He ascended to the throne of the Achaemenid Empire in 522 BCE and toured Egypt at least twice, demonstrating a preference for Egypt even from afar. He held Egyptian culture in high regard and allocated funds towards the reconstruction of damaged temples and the erection of new ones. Consistent with the Persian practice of religious tolerance, Darius honored the Egyptian gods with gifts and statues. He is generally considered to have adopted a more lenient approach towards Egypt than Cambyses. For the second Persian invasion of Greece in 480 BCE, his son, Xerxes I, 486 to 465 BCE, drew upon all the resources of the Achaemenid Empire, including Egypt. Following the Persian defeats at Salamis in 480 BCE and Plataea in 479 BCE, Xerxes shifted his focus away from foreign affairs towards construction projects and cultivating relationships with court ladies. Artaxerxes III, 465 to 424 BCE, succeeded him and spent 6 years battling to suppress the first significant Egyptian rebellion, led by Inaros II, the Libyan royal son of Psamtik V, who was encouraged and supported by Athens in 460 to 454 BCE. While it is accurate to state that the Persians governed Egypt during the 27th and 31st dynasties, Egyptian culture was sustained, and the 30th dynasty of Egyptian rulers granted Egypt a brief resurgence of its former glory before the Persians once again invaded their land. This period encompasses the 27th to 31st dynasties of Egypt. Egyptian resistance to Persian rule, however, is evident throughout the era, and Egypt flourished under Persian rule because the Persian Shahs respected its culture. Emertius of the 28th dynasty, Nectanebo I, and Nectanebo II all governed the nation, commanded troops, and participated in construction projects in the manner of the great pharaohs of the past. Regardless of who instigated the revolts against Persian authority, Egypt's second conquest did not endure for long. Philip II of Macedon, 359 to 336 BCE, defeated the Greek city-states and incorporated them into Macedonian dominion. When he was assassinated in 336 BCE, he was preparing a grand expedition to subjugate Persia. He had already amassed all the resources required for this conquest, which he entrusted to his son, Alexander. The pharaohs of the 30th dynasty upheld the honor of Egyptian kingship and left behind impressive structures, following in the footsteps of their predecessors. Thus, while the late period may be considered the end of Egyptian sovereignty, it should not be viewed as the end of Egyptian civilization. Even in decline, Egypt's rule and accomplishments inspired respect, if not fear, and remain among the most popular and intriguing aspects of the ancient world. Although times have changed, modern Egypt in the 21st century might be seen as a forward-looking iteration of ancient Egypt. The Nile River remains central to the Egyptian people, and they still celebrate the same festivals as in ancient times, such as the spring festivals. The cuisine is noticeably inspired by authentic ancient food, and traditions persist. Even the latest evolved form of the ancient language, Coptic, is still spoken in Egypt in church prayers and amidst their Arabic dialect. Modern Egyptians are proud of their heritage, as evidenced by the parades conducted in Cairo for the transportation of mummies to the Civilization Museum and the reopening of the Avenue of Sphinxes in Luxor. They are constructing new cities, excavating routes to improve commerce with highways carved through mountains and deserts. They are on the verge of opening the largest museum in the world. Excavations continue to yield new discoveries daily, which might soon lead to a discovery akin to that of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. This land will perpetually remain an alluring mystery, dazzling and enchanting people from across the globe with its magic and history.